the fact that someone would derive pleasure from abusing someone else is so wrong and backwards and upside down. But Santa Clara and so many other universities consider it something that's relatively healthy. Welcome back to Gen Z Unplugged. We are excited to talk to you all about a new story that was recently released on Allie Beth Stuckey's show Relatable. She interviewed a young woman named Naomi Epps, who is in a therapy program at Santa Clara University, and she has run into some very disturbing, woke, sexually depraved ideologies that they're teaching her in class in a required course. So we're just going to be talking about this and talking about the issues in therapy in general. So we're going to roll this clip from Relatable where Naomi talks a little bit about her experience.
So one of the final classes I have to do to graduate is called Human Sexuality, and that is a requirement for marriage and family therapists in California to have some education on human sexuality. But when I first enrolled in this course in summer of 2024, I dug into the syllabus and I was shocked by the sexual ethic that was being not just presented but promoted. I immediately discovered sadomasochistic erotica. So for those who don't know what that is, sadomasochism is folks getting pleasure off of inflicting pain on another person, and then some folks derive pleasure from being hurt.
That's wild to me that in her class for to become a therapist, that's seen as so common enough to put it in their curriculum.
Yeah, I like how she said not only presented but promoted.
Yeah,
I think that's the key there. Like not only was this presented, but they were like saying it as a good thing, and just the angle that they took that class in general. Like I think a human sexuality class makes sense if you're going into like family counseling and marriage counseling, but the angle that they took that was totally unnecessary.
Yeah, it really is. And I think you nailed it with the fact that it is being promoted and kind of things that we would call really depraved behaviors. The fact that someone would derive pleasure from abusing someone else is so wrong and backwards and upside down. But Santa Clara and so many other universities consider it something that's relatively healthy. I went to a state school and I was actually in an undergrad program for human development, but on the therapy track. And it was pretty common. I mean, it wasn't as explicit as Santa Clara's program is that Naomi's talking about here, but there was definitely the undertone of, these really depraved behaviors were considered normal and acceptable and healthy options for people.
Yeah, and that's really scary too, that they see it common enough where they would implement that into a class as a required course. Because if you're going to put something as required for graduation, obviously those are things that would be seen as very common, and you're going to see this a lot as a therapist. So for them to add that in there, I mean, that's scary as a generation to see, what they're studying now as something to prepare for that they're going to see later. So,
yeah, it definitely shows how far we've gotten from truth and things like that. And Naomi is a Gen Z woman, and there's so many Gen Z women that are in her shoes going through these programs. So it really just shows very frankly on what we are being forced to consume and learn in classes.
Yeah. And another thing along with that too is that obviously she has other classmates, going along with her in this course. And I believe later on in this conversation, she says that only one other person ever reached out to her about this story after she went public with it, basically saying like, I'm sorry, you seemed very upset by it or something like that. But one person said anything and not even really showing support in a way. It was more just reaching out like, hey, like, sorry about that. But only one person out of a whole class thought at all that was wrong, that should be, something seen as negative instead of a positive, to be learning about that in a therapy class.
Right. Yeah, no, completely agree. And I think something that's interesting that Naomi talks about later in the episode, which definitely go watch this episode for more context and to learn about this story. Obviously can't cover everything here, but yes, go figure it out for yourself. But something that was also really interesting about this is that she asked for an exemption from the assignments and she was denied. Like I think she was originally offered the option to do the class at home, but that still means you have to study the depraved concepts that they're wanting you to study.
Yeah, and submit all the assignments just from home. So that doesn't help.
Right.
Like the root of the problem at all.
Yeah.
And I think in another clip we have that we'll show here in a minute, it basically explains that how the different options and getting allowed to do a, online option. But with the online option, she ended up realizing, oh, they're just going to make me do it, all of the work that I don't want to do. And it's against my morals to do this. So then she had to drop the class. And then when they realized, oh, like you have to have this class in order to graduate, she reapplied and spoke with the professor, like, I'm against doing this for this class. And he was like, oh, you'll be fine. Yeah, we'll get around it. And he ended up lying to her. So it's sad, but
yeah, really sad. Yeah, I want to go ahead and play that next clip.
Part of the reason I chose to go to a Catholic university is because I thought that there would be tolerance for the Christian worldview.
Yeah.
That is not the experience that I've had.
No, not at all. Okay, so you had this course that highlighted BDSM. Was that the first thing that you were introduced to that was that sexually explicit that made you stop and say, I don't want to participate in this?
I was reading the syllabus and I saw where the content was going and I saw the ethos of the curriculum, which is admittedly something I was concerned about because this is a cultural issue. And I'm not naive to the fact that therapy culture is extremely progressive. So I was concerned that the consent-only based ethic was going to be the prevailing norm.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, a supposedly Catholic Christian university promoting... It genuinely is promoting because, and to provide a little bit more context, the goal of sharing this information with students is to like inoculate them to these concepts and to these behaviors so that they're not taken aback in therapy, but in turn they're traumatizing their students.
Yeah, like they're teaching them how to not be shocked by this.
Right.
They're teaching them to react in a way when they hear this in therapy to say, okay, this is normal. Let's talk about it. This is something that happens and this is something to expect when in the first place, this shouldn't even be happening.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I think in therapy, like it is good to react, like not have huge reactions. Right. So I think that's fine. Like, but instead, I think they're training people to tell their clients that this is normal. So I think having a low reaction is okay, but actually telling the clients that like, oh, this is fine, is not okay.
Yeah, and I think later on in this episode, or somewhere in it, she mentions that with transgenderism, that they were taught to affirm even minors when they would come into therapy and speak with them, be like, I feel like I should be a man, different than what they are at birth. They were taught to affirm them in that choice and give them the necessary, documentation or things needed so that they could have, surgeries done to themselves to transform them to look more like a man or a woman. But that's shocking to me is, a therapist is someone that you should trust, someone that has your best interests at heart, you can go to for truth. Because if you can't go to a therapist for truth, a lot of these girls are like, who can I go to? Like, where is that person who they can get true reactions, true understanding, true help on issues that they're dealing with? Because people deal a lot with mental health illness. Like, we have a big culture of that right now. And we're in a world where women especially need these therapists. But if they're going to them, and this is what they're trained on, to affirm you in being a different gender or things like that, that's a big problem.
Huge. It really is colossal. And just like speaking from my own experience kind of in this world, it is so common and prevalent and insidious. And I feel for the students who didn't speak up because the way that the material is presented, like definitely like the sexual behavior, DEI policies are another big one, which Naomi talks about in the episode as well. And then gender affirmation, it's presented in a way that seems so positive and is put on such a high pedestal that you can't even question it. And it is presented as fact. And yes, college students and grad school program or students in grad school, they're adults, but they're under 25. Their prefrontal cortex hasn't even fully developed yet. So they are still very much moldable. And these experiences that they're, being exposed to in class, like Naomi also talks about having to fill out a comprehensive an autobiography about her sexual experience. On what planet is that necessary to be a good marriage and family counselor? I cannot fathom why that would ever be relevant.
Yeah, exactly. And just like other things she said about things that they disliked about their body, to write it down on a piece of paper, give it to the professor. The professor would then, mix it up and give it to the classmates, and everyone would have to read what people wrote that they didn't like about their bodies. Like you were saying, on what planet is that okay? Where have we gotten to with this where we're okay body shaming ourselves to then be on a public display for everyone's opinion? So that was very surprising to me too. This whole episode with Allie Beth was just so surprising and eye-opening to me, because I never knew that this was going on behind the scenes in the therapy world, but it makes so much sense now.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, in the beginning of this clip that we just played, she said that she was expecting, which rightfully so, she was expecting Christian beliefs to at least be tolerated.
Right.
And instead, not only are they not tolerated, but other beliefs are, and they are promoted. And she's going to this Catholic Christian school, which is like just sad to me. Like, I went to a Catholic school and none of those things were there. And it's just, I feel very upset that her school did not stay firm to those like normal Christian beliefs and are normalizing other things, tolerating those things and promoting them on top of that.
It's more and more common that, all schools, but particularly schools that are supposedly Christian. There's the school you went to and there are other schools like it are actually faithful to the Christian faith, which is incredible. But the fact that students have to actually do like in-depth research into the programs that they're interested in, because even schools that are supposedly Catholic or Protestant in name, they have so many programs that are just completely infiltrated, because academia is so infiltrated with woke ideology, and therapy is especially, that it's not even questioned, because like, oh, this is what we're getting from the state, we have to teach this, and it's not being compared to a Christian worldview at all.
And I know you experienced that too, going to a state school and going the therapy route. What was I know you spoke about a little bit what your experience was there, but what did that look like? Like, what were some of the classes that you took? I know you mentioned something on thruples and like other transgenderism and being okay with that. What was your experience like? Like, what was the craziest classes you had to take, and how did you, being a conservative and being someone, with those type of morals, how did you reconcile with that, with some of the classes you had to take?
It was challenging, and it's sad because ultimately I got to the point where I couldn't reconcile my values and what I was told to embrace as a future therapist. So I graduated with a degree in human development, which is similar to kind of the degree that this master's student was getting at Santa Clara, but I didn't pursue therapy because it is so infiltrated and it is so woke, like she's saying here, that I just knew that I wasn't going to be able to reconcile those two things. So I ended up going to the conservative movement, and I get to do counseling all the time with my students. So I definitely get to fulfill that desire, which is awesome. But yeah, it was hard. And in terms of the classes that I had to take, the one that stands out the most is a family relationships class, where we talked about, heterosexual marriages for a second, but we talked about all these other type of family relationships a whole lot more. Like you said, thruples. And just to dive in on that a little bit more, I remember we were forced to watch this documentary about thruples, and it was framed to promote thruple relationships as like a healthy option, and clients that you would encounter in a therapy practice. So yeah, we watched this documentary about a man and two women all live together in the same house. And throughout the documentary, the women are so jealous of one another, obviously, because they're married to the same man. And they framed jealousy as something positive that would fuel each relationship, because there's 2 relationships happening, so that they would actually be stronger. So not only are they promoting essentially polygamy, they're also promoting jealousy as a virtue, which again is so upside down from the Christian faith, which, you know, jealousy is not, envy is not a positive thing at all. It's very much a negative thing. So to put that on a pedestal too was also really backwards. Something else that I encountered was learning about gender neutral preschools. Which,
what does that even look like?
Okay, so I think we studied, it was somewhere in probably the Netherlands, somewhere that's super like socialist and leftist, where they got all these kids together in a preschool, and none of the kids were assigned a gender, so that they could play with the Barbies, they could play with the cars, and whichever one they kind of gravitated towards, that would indicate which gender they might be selecting. And again, this was not framed as a negative thing at all. I wish it was. I would be grateful for that, to know about something and know that it's wrong. But they were instead teaching us it so that we would consider that as a viable option for people.
That's where I think it's scary, is when there's one way to do it where you're just teaching about this is what's going on in the world.
Right.
Like, yeah, it's good to know things that are happening, right? But it's another thing to promote it and say that this is normal, this is okay. That's where it veers off the path from learning to oppressing this on you as a student and saying, you should know that this is normal and you're going to see this and you should be okay with it.
Yeah, that's so true. And like, if I was in that preschool, I would 100% be assigned a boy. I have 6 brothers. I didn't like dolls. I played with cars all the time. Yeah. Like, from my personal experience, if I was in that preschool, I would be a boy. Yeah. And so like, the fact that they use, and like, these kids are so little. Yeah, like the fact that they are, I don't know, just putting their ideology on top of them, and then sometimes without the parents even knowing, and then some parents are even supporting it. It's so backwards, like you said.
Yeah. And how are you assigning a gender by the use of a toy? Like, that's
happens
wild.
all the time now, though.
And it's so funny, because a decade ago the left would have said, oh, Barbies aren't just for girls, you know, but now your gender is assigned based on what toys you're interested in. Like there's no consistency.
That's
there.
crazy.
Yeah, and another interesting aspect of the kind of counseling program that I was in was that they really emphasized intersectionality, which, if you're not familiar with that, it's like this wheel of the different identities, and there's there's a section for race, there's a section for gender, socioeconomic status, and essentially they told us, okay, as future therapists, you're going to encounter lots of different people, and if people fit into the category of, you know, low class, a race that's been oppressed and a gender that's been oppressed, you're going to have to speak to them differently and be a lot more sensitive than you would someone who doesn't experience those things, which there's an element of truth there, because you do have to be sensitive, especially if someone's coming from a really, really poor background. But that says nothing about the person at their core. And someone who grew up really wealthy, who grew up in a great neighborhood and had everything they could ever need, could have extreme psychological distress. Yeah. And to say that that person is better off than a healthy person who just happens to be African American, like, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. You said something about gender oppression, or like, what does that even mean? There's 2 genders, male and female. And some people might be shocked to hear that, but what does that mean? Like, which gender is more oppressed right now? Yeah, well,
it always switched. Yeah. It was always like, you got to refresh the intersectionality wheel. So, I mean, genuinely, I was in my undergrad program from 2019 until 2023, and they just kept switching which one was the most vulnerable.
Oh my goodness.
But it was non-binary. It was a man who thinks he's a woman.
It was
a
the alphabet.
It was the full gambit. It was everything. So, and this is at a big, state school where I would say half the student population is pretty conservative too.
Wow.
So it doesn't really matter where you are. Christian schools can be infiltrated with this. So it speaks to a lot of things. And I know that we have a couple other examples in addition to Santa Clara that we're going to talk about here where therapy programs have been infiltrated too.
Yeah, we actually have a few examples like you said, and the first one that we're going to talk about is actually also in California, which is a funny coincidence. It's the Antioch University in California. And this information is coming from the American Enterprise Institute. And it says, after the death of George Floyd in 2020, Antioch University's 3-year counseling program intensified its focus on race and oppression. So this former student, her name's Leslie Elliott, reported that the curriculum increasingly positioned counselors as, quote, foot soldiers in the culture wars and encouraged them to act as social change agents rather than focusing solely on individual client needs, which I think is a huge problem.
That's what therapy is there for.
It's insane.
I know. They're literally trying to turn therapists into social justice warriors. This is happening all over the country.
Yeah, it's crazy. And then Leslie said that she described this shift as ideological capture, which the program prioritized activism over the traditional therapeutic practices. And she said that the emphasis on group identity and systemic issues overshadowed individual client experiences, which she believed undermined the therapeutic alliance. This led her to leave the program and pursue coaching instead to avoid what she saw as excessive ideological influence. So there is a lot there, and I know you kind of entered the conservative field instead of going with your original plan as a therapist, and it's because of all of this like ideological shift and what you say, the ideological capture, the fact that therapists have to be foot soldiers now, it's for culture wars, is, I don't know, I think it's all insane.
And that's why too, something that she said, encourage them to act as social change agents instead of focusing on individual client needs. That's their job. As a therapist, you focus on the individual need of that person for their betterment, to help them in whatever they're going through.
Right.
Right. Like, when did that change?
When did that change?
Slowly, I guess.
The definition of a therapist is that.
Right. And something that we learned about a lot is kind of these different levels of impact and effects on people. So there was the micro level about the individual, and supposedly counseling is supposed to be really focused on the individual, but we were taught to embrace kind of these outer levels too, that are on I forget all the names of them. There goes my education, right? But each circle of this chart that they would show us would have some influence, and it went all the way up to, family, friends, community, and then the last one was social structures and systemic oppression. And it was like, you have to consider how this person is being affected by the systems that control them when trying to counsel them.
There shouldn't be systems that control them in the first place.
Yeah.
That's wild.
It is unreal.
Leslie is now, what was she doing now?
This is so interesting. So Leslie Elliott, who is the student who went to Antioch and was the whistleblower for kind of the Antioch's move to get their therapists to be social change agents, social justice warriors, she actually left kind of the traditional therapy world, and she started an organization called the Radical Center, where she does, instead of traditional therapy, she does coaching, and she tries to actually address people's issues free of ideological capture, which is so interesting. And it's really encouraging to see people like that, because what's so sad about this is that people who would have been great critically thinking therapists who would genuinely help people and free people from the ideological capture that's happening in other therapy clinics, they could have done something amazing in therapy, but they have to leave that world. So thankfully, Leslie Elliott has kind of figured out a third option, but so many Christian conservative women specifically are leaving the field, which is really sad, because I think that's where they're needed the most.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. But it's also beautiful to see that they stuck up for that, because that's going to help them in their future endeavors. Even if they don't go the therapy route, like what you did, you stuck up for what you believed, and you're already empowering so many young women through all of our summits and all of our student programs that you direct. But another one we wanted to talk about was from the Tennessee Conservative. At Trevecca Nazarene University, a private Christian college, They actually hosted the Tennessee Licensed Professional Counselors Association Counseling and Therapy Summit. That is a mouthful. The event included breakout sessions. So they hosted this summit, and some of the classes that they did at the summit were, one was called Bark, the Kink and Culture of Human Puppy Play. First of all, which explored non-traditional therapeutic practices and sexual identities. Can someone explain what that even is?
I'm afraid to.
I'm afraid to go there.
I'm afraid to. But this kind of fits into me with like the drag brunches and the furry phenomenon.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, the fact that these things that are so obviously wrong and disturbing are promoted, and the fact that the Tennessee Licensed Professional Counselors Association would embrace this sort of thing. That is a very official and supposedly respected organization.
Yeah.
Who are setting the precedent for people who will become counselors.
Yeah. And something funny about that too, back to Naomi's podcast with Allie Beth, she mentioned where her professor actually did something about things associated with kink stuff.
Yeah, like he participated.
He went to festivals.
Activity, yeah.
Yeah, he literally associated with them and went to festivals and would come back and speak on it and show things from his festivities.
Yeah, that's not a coincidence that his class would also include BDSM videos.
Yeah, and requirements on writing your whole autobiography on what you've done and submitting it to your professor. Like that's that is not.
That's got to be illegal. You know. Yeah.
Well,
having to put that on display. Yeah.
Yeah, it really should be. There's probably countless other examples. Look into this, especially if you're interested in therapy and counseling. This is definitely something worth looking into, because Naomi will talk about this a little bit in the next clip, but the therapy world is dying in a sense that it's been so taken over by this ideology. So we'll go ahead and play the next clip.
This field is actually on the brink of collapse, and it is happening slowly and then all at once, and we are in the acceleration period. Because critical thinkers, people of faith, people with diverse worldviews, they're being pushed out of this helping profession. And one woman I spoke to, her name is Susanna Alexander. She does a ton of research about the accreditation bodies that license therapists, and KCREP is the biggest one. They license counselors, and she describes it as a money-making cartel. There is incentives for KCREP to become the accreditor in every single state. That is their goal. And they are completely ideologically captured. In fact, FAIR, the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism, just filed a civil rights complaint against KCREP for religious discrimination, ideological compliance, and a whole gamut. So this is so much bigger. Like my story, it's a blip. And it's crazy, and it's about sex, so it's going to get a lot of publicity. The public needs to know that this field is in crisis, in complete crisis. And we need to have an honest conversation right now about where we go from here, because there's a mental health crisis as well in our country. Mm-hmm. So where the heck do people go to get good quality evidence-based care?
Yeah, we could probably
That's such a good point at the end, because mental health crisis is up so much right now, especially in Gen Z culture and young women. Where do they go? Where do they go if that's their only, option, to go to someone who is going to tell them that they have all these wild problems and affirm them in, maybe I am a guy because I don't feel like a woman. Maybe it just starts there and they grow it to something that it's not related to at all. Like, where do young women go?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting how the culture in general is like, and don't get me wrong, therapy is very useful, and like good therapists, like they're gold. Like
they save people's lives.
They do. But the ones who aren't, like, single-handedly take people's lives down. And it's so interesting because the culture is like, oh, everyone should go to therapy all the time, every week of their lives. Like, it's so pushed in today's culture. And what they're pushing is essentially that, like not the good quality therapist that maybe we had a few years ago, but like she said, it's happening slowly. So, and now all of a sudden we're in this acceleration where therapy is being pushed, mental health is in crisis, and this is what people are getting. And that's only going to continue to bring people downwards, which is really, really sad.
Yeah.
And therapists are incentivized to keep you in therapy because that's how they make money. So if you take a therapist who is not motivated by the right reasons, but is instead motivated to be a social justice warrior and knows that the more problems you have, the more you're going to come to therapy, that's going to cause an enormous issue and has already started to cause an enormous issue, especially among young women who, like you said, in our culture are encouraged to go to therapy and be in therapy endlessly. You know, the culture tries to equate mental and physical health, and I think that to an extent is good. Mental health is extremely important, but we don't tell people to keep going to the doctor once a week to heal a bone that has been healed for 15 years. So I don't think it's fair to put them on the exact same level because they are different. And mental health does have to be treated in a unique way that doesn't continue people in these, you know, talk therapy sessions where they ruminate on issues just endlessly.
Yeah. And I think that's so true, and it's so important when choosing a therapist, or if you do have, you know, these mental health issues that you want to speak to someone about, the importance of researching and truly finding, I don't know if it needs to be like a biblical therapist, someone like that who's based in truth and who will, you know, speak truth to you and help you with what you're going through, because, you know, like you said, a good therapist is like gold. So finding someone who does have your best interests at heart, I think, is so important. And don't just trust anyone, because at the end of the day, people trust their therapists. Right. There is that underlying trust that they have because, oh, they, you know, got their degree in this, they got their graduate degree in this, they know what they're talking about. Don't trust everyone. I mean, I think everyone knows that nowadays. Like, you don't just trust anyone on the street. So really find someone who you can relate to, who will have your best interests at heart, because at the end of the day, you're basically opening your whole self up to them, and they will have a lot of power on that. So just like making sure that you find the right one for you, the right one who has the best interests for your future and for yourself. But yeah, I think that's a big decision to make when people look at therapists. Because I knew girls when I was younger, maybe in middle school, that shared to me that, you know, their mom went to therapy, you know, once a week. And so they went with her. And then once they got to a certain age, they just started going to the same lady every single week because their mom did it. And getting in a cycle like that, if you don't actually have a need for a therapist, I think that's an example like what you were saying, a therapist, someone who just has you coming back to keep their paychecks coming in, because they fuel off of having people in therapy that they can feed from and make their living off of.
Yeah, honestly, I think for me personally, I was very shocked to hear all of this, like all the specific stuff that this woman was talking about in Allie Beth's podcast. Because I think me and a lot of other people know that all of these kinks are a thing, and like in big public schools, like they're, you know, pushing ideology and things like that. Right. But I never thought of it from the specific angle of counseling and therapy. Like, I guess I didn't really think that our therapists were getting this when they're getting trained. Like, in the back of my head, I knew that they're teaching in schools, but the specificity of the therapists that are being trained in this was very shocking to me. And I think a lot of Gen Z women need to know this, which is why we're talking about it.
Oh, 100%. I mean, this opened up my eyes too to the whole world, and taught me and showed me things that I've never heard of and never seen before, and never knew that, you know, the therapy world could be like that.
Yeah, no, I'm super encouraged by people like Naomi who are sticking up for their values, for their Christian faith, and for, you know, the principles that we really embrace. And to just draw back to kind of just the mission of our show here, we want to help people thrive. And it's clear that therapists are not being taught to help people thrive. They're being taught to promote behavior that we know will lead to just more depression and more destruction in their lives. So just to wrap up, we want to encourage all the Gen Z women out there to just be cognizant of this sort of thing, to be aware. And if you are pursuing counseling or therapy, stay in the fight, find a program that actually embraces your values, because we genuinely need good Christian conservative women out there who are going to fight for truth and actually help people flourish. So that is everything for today. So with that, we're going to go ahead and close out today's show, but be sure to like and subscribe, comment something you learned, questions that you still have. We would love to bring on a biblical counselor on the show. And I think we're planning to do that within the next few months. So stay tuned. And thank you all so much for joining us today.